Aims and intentions for the amphibious operation area. Establish a bridgehead, East Falklands, preferably with an airstrip, and begin the repossession of the Falklands. Fan out from the bridgehead, secure it, pending arrival of 5th Infantry Brigade. So 3rd Commando Brigade were to get ashore, conduct a night landing, San Carlos, and take the high ground, Ajax Bay Factory and Port San Carlos. 40 Commando was supposed to land, go to Ponies Valley Bay with a troop of the Blues and Royals with light armour, and 4-5 Commando into Ajax Bay, and then move on to Capito Hill. So that's the first wave. The second wave is 2 Para Reg, move across Blue Beach to Sussex Mountains. So remember what I said earlier, get a bridgehead, get a beachhead secure, and then dominate the high ground. In this case, it was Sussex Mountain. And then 3 Para into Green Beach, support securing San Carlos, and then the surrounding settlement, again with Blues and Royals. And then the third wave was the all-important light guns, so the 105, get the Rapier batteries ashore, and hopefully get some, start the process of getting logistics ashore. 4-2 Commando were to remain on Canberra as the brigade reserve. So there was a little bit of flex in this. There was a commando ready just in case the Argentines pulled something out the hat and actually attacked the bridgehead. So the run in to San Carlos, right, and bear in mind, this is done on the back of a fag packet with a mixture of Royal Navy and merchant vessel COs. So on the 20th at 14:15, the amphibious group detached from main force, and then it started its run in. 2000 hours, Antrim and Ardent detached from the amphibious group. Ardent runs past Fanning Head, where there was an Argentine observation post, proceeds to a gun line in Grantham Sound. Antrim goes off to Fanning Head to support Special Forces attack on the small garrison there. And there was a real concern because Fanning Head, if you look at it on the map that we'll provide in the sources, heavy machine guns, light anti-tank weapons, worst case scenario, guided anti-tank missiles, they could have made a real mess of the amphibious group as they ran through. So O250, Fanning Head commenced the shoot. SBS supported by HMS Antrim. SBS had 81mm mortars. The Argentine group had 81mm mortars, 105mm recoilless rifles. A number escaped. Unfortunately, they were involved in an incident later on where 2 Army Gazelle helicopters were shot down and survivors were machine gunned in the water. Glamorgan carried out a distraction shoot over Berkeley Sound using high explosive star shell and chaff. The Crazy Y, HMS Yarmouth, O258, she starts to do her anti-submarine work across the north entrance. Right, so she's basically doing your ASW sweep, pinging away happily. Amphibious group passes Jersey Point, 0300 hours, Plymouth. She's at the junction of San Carlos River and San Carlos Water. Brilliant has taken up position at Many Branch Harbour. Argonaut is between Fanning Head and Jersey Point. Fort Austin has proceeded through. She's at Shanso Point and Cat Island. And the troop ships run in a line and then anchor close inshore. And then finally at 0337, you've got Phillips and Intrepid anchor. So by 348, the first landing craft are going ashore. 16 landing craft with troops embarked are in formation and they're making run-in on the beach. The whole operation was 45 minutes late from 8 hours, which, you know, in military planning ain't that bad at all. And the first troops are ashore and then moving inland. And then the final piece of the puzzle at 0417, Canberra with Commando Reserve. He anchors off Fanning Head. And then daylight breaks. And then we're game on.
I've just got a few bits I'd like to add to that because I think they add some value. So Captain Larkin in Fearless was a submariner, and he'd come up with the zigzag pan that they'd used on the voyage south to make detection and tracking by any submarines more difficult. And he also came up with a zigzag plan for the approach, for the transit from the task force to San Carlos, which made it appear if they'd been observed, which they weren't, that they were actually headed for Stanley. And then the force made a big dogleg to the north before turning south for Falklands Sound. So, the amphibious unloading plan was planned to take a week to execute. Commodore Clapp decided against sending in all the ships at once to reduce the risk of losses, and he described the whole planning approach as a threat reduction exercise. A last-minute concern was the number of troops in Canberra, and on the 19th of May it was decided to remove a commando and a parachute regiment brigade from Canberra and transfer one to Fearless and one to Intrepid. Despite being in the open South Atlantic, Fearless and Intrepid were able to dock down in conditions that Captain Larkin described as marginal but acceptable. Amazingly, the next day on the 20th of May, poor visibility and fog descended around the islands, and the force was able to make its approach undetected. Visibility was as low as 200 yards with ship's radar silent, but now well versed in operating this way, having done so since sailing from the UK. The troops began to be unloaded with the ship still in Falklands Sound in the early hours of the 21st of May. The task force operated on UK time, GMT, which was 4 hours ahead of local time in the Falklands. This meant, for example, 8 a.m. on a British ship was actually 4 a.m. local time. By dawn, most of the troops were ashore, the element of surprise having been achieved. Canberra was unloaded on the 21st and then moved back out to sea. After the troops were unloaded, next ashore were the Rapier missile systems and then artillery. The huge task of unloading all the ammunition, most of which was in RFA Stromness, was next. Then it was stores like food. Unloading took much longer than planned, and the reasons for this were many, such as every time there was an air raid, the helicopters had to take cover close to land to avoid being attacked. Landing craft also had to stop moving equipment ashore to assist damaged ships like the Argonaut and move bomb disposal teams to ships with unexploded bombs in them. Defence of the amphibious operating area was down to 7 escorts. HMS Antrim was the anti-air warfare commander. Then there was Argonaut, Ardent, Broadsword, Brilliant, Plymouth and Yarmouth. Initially, the ships were positioned in Falklands Sound, so attacking aircraft had to get past them to reach San Carlos. This was also because of the possibility of a submarine being in the Sound, which actually wasn't the case. So Captain Jeremy Larkin in Fearless described the first raid that came through on the 21st as absolute chaos. He was trying to fight the ship, HMS Phillips, from the operations room that was small and crowded with all the amphibious staff in it. Plus, the effect of all the land around made the radars virtually useless. So he decided to go up to the gun direction platform and fight the ship from there, directing the 4 Seacat missile launchers and the Bofors guns. One of the early raids, he described how a Seacat missile from Intrepid passed down the side of Fearless at very close range. And that was sort of the kind of confusion that was going on in the early raids while everyone got their act together. It had been extremely noisy up on the gun direction platform as the raids came through. You've low-level jet aircraft making a hell of a noise as they fly past the ship. Alan West, in his interview he did on the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War, said that was one of the things that he took away from it was the noise of the attacking aircraft being deafening as they would fly overhead. Add to that, next to the gun direction platform on the bridge wings, you've got the 40mm Bofors guns firing away. One of the other things that Captain Larkin did after the first couple of raids when he was up on the gun direction platform was when raids were coming through, he ordered the helicopters to clear away from the ship. So you imagine a big Sea King helicopter hovering down aft over the flight deck or being on deck, rotors running. Again, that's a huge amount of noise, all of which you're trying to fight the ship and give direction to your missile directors and guns crews over above. So he made sure that helicopters were kept clear of the ship as raids came through, so he was better able to direct the gunfire. He said he wasn't really scared being up there in and amongst it. He said he did on occasion try and think of reasons that he could give for not going up there, but he always went up there to direct the fighting of the ship during the air raids. There'd also be the noise of his own ship's engines and funnel exhaust. So it'd be an extremely noisy environment up there with lots going on. Everybody have to shout at the top of their voices to be heard. Broadcasts being made over the upper deck. Extremely challenging environment to operate. But Phillips never actually took any enemy action damage. He did say Phillips took some damage from what they believe was cannon fire from a jet to start with, but they later reckoned it was from a 4.5 shell exploding in airburst close next to the ship, which is interesting. In more general terms, he described the loss of Atlantic Conveyor as a massive setback, with all the helicopters and tentage that was lost, resulting in the troops having to walk across the island and artillery being moved by helicopter. He said that 5 Infantry Brigade, the Scots and the Welsh Guards, didn't do enough to keep fit and get ready for action on the way south, and it rapidly became apparent that Fire Brigade were not fit enough to walk across the islands. With the loss of the Atlantic Conveyor, this caused a great problem which led to Sir Galahad and Sir Tristram having to go to Fitzroy. He said there was a lot of political pressure from home and they had to take risks to win, and there was a real desire to keep momentum going. After Goose Green, Captain Larkin actually went ashore and walked the whole battlefield with Hector Gunnan from 3 Para to understand the issues that the troops were facing ashore. On one occasion, when Phillips was attacked, both the attacking aircraft were downed and a piece of Skyhawk cockpit canopy landed on the bridge wing next to the Bofors gun. The pilot ejected safely and was rescued by a landing craft and brought on board Fearless, where he was treated. I believe this was the guy that is in some of the video footage with a severely dislocated knee. He also had the press on board in the form of Brian Hanrahan, and despite flak jackets and tin hats being in close supply, did supply Brian Hanrahan and his cameraman with those. And Brian Hanrahan said they were made more than welcome on board Fearless, in fact more welcome than they'd been made on board Hermes. After the 21st, the escorts were all moved inside San Carlos in a ring around the amphibious ships. Part of the reason the escorts took such a beating on the 21st was it was realised they were too spread out. But as we've seen, the Argentine Air Force also suffered lots of losses on the 21st. By the end of the 21st of May, D-Day, all the troops had got ashore unscathed. Rapier was ashore, artillery and stores were beginning to be unloaded, and Surgeon Commander Rick Jolly had disembarked the field hospital from Canberra to Ajax Bay. Commodore Clapp, in my opinion, has never received the recognition he deserved for pulling it all off. If the landings had failed, the whole Falklands operation would have failed.
Yeah, and I mean, considering they couldn't get the ships taken up from trade COs into the briefings, as I said earlier, that's a phenomenal achievement by the masters. Even though they had a Royal Navy liaison officer and maybe, a couple of signallers.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, a lot of the ships taken up from trade crews were not told that they would be expected to participate in frontline action. They were told that they would be doing logistics, running down, and then suddenly it's, oh, by the way, you're going to be part of the amphibious operating area. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yes.
So I think it's again, as far as the merchant ship crews go, that it's not mentioned enough. The balls of steel on these people, especially on the ship carrying ammunition, which was Elk, wasn't it? She was sat on top of a munitions storage area.
Oh, you have to think that these people did an incredible job, because it's not really their general remit, is it? Running into a hot area.
No, and they weren't pre-briefed before, probably to avoid them getting danger money, which I think, to be honest with you, civvies more than entitled to. If you wear uniform, that's part of the fun. Don't get a sad on, get a mag on, and stag on. For the merchant ship crews to be told, yeah, you'll be running logistics, and then, oh, by the way, we want you off the beachhead. Oh, and by the way, you may be attacked by Argentine aircraft. Huh. Okay, great. Thanks for that.
The other little bit.
Were they entitled to a South Atlantic medal?
Surely, you'd have to think they were. But thinking, knowing the MOD, maybe they might have argued against it. I don't know.
The other bit on the running gunny that we discussed was Alacrity and San Luis, wasn't it? We were talking about that the other day between us. So when Alacrity did that run into Falklands Sound, I can't remember the date off the top of my head. 12th of May rings a bell.
That was a mine. That was a mine hunt, wasn't it? But
yeah,
I think it wasn't Mike Clapp. It might have been Sotheby said he was very dubious about the value of that. He was like, well, look, if there's mines there at 21 doing 25 knots through the sand, you're not necessarily going to run onto a mine. That's not confirmation there are no mines. It just means that Type 21 was particularly lucky not running into anything on the way in or out. It strikes me as a bit of a silly way to do it. I'd have just had lead ship run in, and then if she ran onto a mine, that was going to be it. I think that was just an exercise in confidence for combat amphibious warfare. And it could have ended up a needless waste of a ship. Had they laid even a small minefield there, you'd have lost the 21.
Yeah. Well, my wider point was that on her way out, the San Luis made a torpedo attack against her, didn't she? Well, that was unsuccessful, as her
supposedly
182 decoy. Yeah, but the significance of her making that run through the Sound doesn't ever seem to have been acknowledged by the Argentines. Now, depending which source you read, San Luis returned to harbour either on the 17th or the 19th and never went back to sea again. So when a submarine gets back to base port, the captain submits his patrol report, doesn't he? So he either didn't put in his patrol report that he carried out a torpedo attack on Alacrity when she left the Sound, which I find unremarkable. But I don't think that would be the case. Or he did report it, but those higher up the chain of command didn't pick up on it, that perhaps what she was doing there was either a minesweeping run or some form of reconnaissance. And it might have given the Argentines a clue that we were going to do something in the Falkland Sound area.
Didn't the Argentinians think that at least two of the diversionary operations were real, or maybe three? I mean, they seem to have kind of taken hook, line, and sinker some of these operations where they would, shell and use star shells and stuff like that.
Their idea was, because a lot of their doctrine was formed off US Marine Corps, their assumption was the landing was going to be Port Stanley or near Port Stanley, and we do an opposed landing. So that seems to have dominated their thinking. They knew that there were distraction ops going on, but I get the impression that their primary concern was that we would do a full-on opposed landing somewhere near Stanley, which to them made perfect sense. The idea of tabbing across that terrain, they were kind of scratching their heads going, really? That's not actually doable. Because, of course, if you're a non-professional army, what you do is you tailor your tactics to what you think the Op 4 are capable of doing, and that tends to be what you can do. So if you're in charge of a conscript army, the idea of conscripts grabbing a £120 Bergen and then walking for miles and miles and miles, you'd be like, nah, I ain't fucking up there.
That's true.
So I think there was a bit of confirmation bias going on there. Tim, what are we up to next? First air attacks, you and Hop?
Yeah, go for it, Hop.
Okay, so I'm going to open up with the Kripa attack. He He's in a MB 339, which is just a light attack jet / trainer. They're kind of robust, as a lot of training aircraft will be, and I was surprised when I found out how much ordnance that thing could carry. And its short field capability. So on that particular day, he was armed with two 30-millimeter cannon pods. Probably not a ton of ammo. I haven't been able to find out how much they carry in a pod. Really doesn't matter. And two rocket pods. And he took off out of Stanley and turned northwest and was tracking sort of. If you look at your maps, from what I can tell, according to his map, he went north of Mount Kent, which is a decent size, 458-meter mountain. Tracked up those valleys that will shield you, and he probably went north of they call it no man's land, somewhere close to Teal Inlet, and got himself up there just on north of Port San Carlos, and then he did a hard left and came down over Fanning Head, or just off the coast, and all hell broke loose. Pretty sure the ship he engaged was Argonaut. Tim, you can sort of fact check me on that. He made another hard turn into San Carlos water, just skimming by the Fanning Island, I think it's called, and all hell broke loose. He was getting shot at a lot. He strafed and fired his rockets and did another hard port turn and tracked down Port Carlos, that inlet by Port San Carlos. Again, followed the track of the mountains, the Wickham Heights, and went back and immediately reported what he had seen at Stanley. That whole iteration it was less than 100 miles of flying because of the distances out there, and he did the whole thing in under 30 minutes and landed, and that information got sent back across the waters, and started to inform some of the attack planning that was already going on the Argentine mainland. So that's sort of the quick and dirty of Crippa. He operated very low altitude, probably stayed at 200 feet or less, and he had the advantage of he probably was kind of coming out of the sun when he did his first attack on the ships, which is obviously smart. And sunrise, I looked this up a few days ago, but I think sunrise was something like 8 o'clock, so it was still dawnish. Has anybody checked that?
No, I mean, he left a lot of 20 mil cannon shell cases on the upper deck of Argonaut.
Yeah, I mean, he did some, again, another example of some actually decent shooting. And they may not be the most skilled at anti-shipping attacks, but no shortage of guts with these guys. I mean, he was supposed to be a flight of two, but the field, Stanley started getting shelled by, I'm not sure which ship, and so his Dash 2 didn't do the takeoff and abandoned his aircraft there pretty much on the runway, from what I understand.
I think, Tim, didn't he hit a 965 aerial? So that says to me he was probably very low and in the climb slightly.
Yeah, 40 feet probably, yeah.
Yeah, so if he was putting rounds through the mainmast, then I don't know. Would that mean he came in very low and he was sort of gaining a slight bit of altitude? Because otherwise most of the hits would have been around the hull sort of thing. So he had his finger on the trigger and then he decided to climb up over her.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, the gun sight's pretty worthless, when your windscreen starts filling up with ship. So that's a very plausible scenario for me. And he also was trying to take it all in, and he had a pretty good ability to map out where the ships basically were in San Carlos water, even though the entire evolution probably took 90 seconds. I mean, it's less than 5 miles from where he engaged Argonaut until where he was escaping in Port San Carlos. So he wasn't in the Sound probably even a full minute, but he came away with the intel.
And then Tim, Argonaut gets attacked by 5 Skyhawks.
Yes, that that first attack in the book I read was given at 10:15 UK time because the task force operated on GMT. There's probably a degree of uncertainty around the times in the different sources. So then she was attacked by the Skyhawk and had bombs bouncing over her. And Lieutenant Malcolm Hardesty was on the gun direction platform, and a bomb bounced overhead. And the petty officer Hugh Jones, who was next to him, if Petty Officer Jones hadn't been bent over, the bomb would have taken his head off. They had another bomb that bounced over the forecastle, and they were trying to do weapon direction by the naked eyeball with CCAT controlled in the visual mode. So the attack that put the bombs into her was at about 13:37, and she was working up to full power when she was bounced by another wave of Skyhawks, was in a turn to starboard. So those two bombs hit her but failed to explode. One struck in the boiler room and one in the forward CCAT magazine. The officer of the watch, Sub-Lieutenant Morgan, he ran down from the bridge and let go of the anchor to bring the ship to a halt. The bomb that went in the boiler room caused the most damage, resulted in multiple severed steam pipes because she was a steam-powered ship, which leaked a lot of steam into the boiler in the engine room, and the spaces had to be evacuated. With the ship turning towards the shore, this meant the bridge order for a stern power wasn't answered. But the stokers did, however, shut down everything they could as they evacuated, and it was actually the loss of steam power, steam pressure, that helped to slow the ship down. She also lost her diesel generators due to contamination of diesel fuel by seawater. And eventually the Plymouth came alongside her to provide power until the diesel generators were restarted the next day. That bomb was defused by an Army bomb disposal team. And later on, the hole in the ship's side was patched temporarily by the ShipWrekt Chief MEM Dave Townsend, and he welded a metal plate over the hole in the side of the ship whilst wearing a diver's suit. He said that I stuck out like a sore thumb in a black suit against a grey ship, and he was pulled up on deck 5 times and actually dropped into the water on another occasion during subsequent air attacks. And to weld this plate over the hole took 4 hours. So I think he's a pretty brave chap there. The other bomb went in the CCAT magazine forward, which I presume must have been the old 4.5 mag, Don, don't you think?
No, I think it was down aft. So it went into the CCAT deep mag, which that would make sense, that being aft. Detonated a round in the hoist. Yeah, that's what killed Matthew Stewart and Ian Boldy. It also ruptured an adjacent diesel tank, which fortunately extinguished the fire in the mag, because interestingly enough, they were storing 40-60 Bofors ammunition in the CCAT mag as well. Now, if I remember rightly, that's mixing stores. You're not really supposed to do that. So clearly they were overloaded with 40-60 ammunition, and a decision had been made before they sailed. Well, let's just put Bofors in the missile mag. I'm not sure if that's something that we would ever do now, but it cleared off some warheads and it came to rest embedded in another CCAT missile.
Yeah, I think it was actually forward, actually. But everything that I've researched, there was a CCAT magazine up forward. Whether it was just like a feeder mag for this forward CCAT system with the main deep mag down aft, I don't know. Then Sub-Lieutenant Morgan, who I mentioned earlier, he was a diving officer.
You're right. Diesel tank flooded. 3 Echo Zulu mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
There was another fire forward, which the DC team did well to put out. There was a lot of smoke, apparently. And then Sub-Lieutenant Morgan, who was a diving officer, dived into the magazine via a small hatch. And the magazine still had the diesel in it that had come from the ruptured diesel tank, the bomb, and the bodies of 2 sailors. The 2 sailors, young sailors, within it. He said that his job was to locate the bodies, assess the condition of the bomb and ammunition and missiles in the magazine, He also inspected the hull. He found a 2-foot wide hole on the port side forward and a bulge and split in the ship's side to starboard. The navigator, Lieutenant Commander Forsyth, said that was an extremely courageous dive, and he put himself in a great deal of danger to do it. And Sub-Lieutenant Morgan was awarded Distinguished Service Cross for that. He later made another dive.
Chief MEM was found. He was trying to plug the hole in the boiler room because the portside blower had stopped, and that caused the boiler to explode.
Yeah.
When the blanket search was carried out and the team went down there, he was stood on the bomb with a sledgehammer, whacking bits into the hole in the hole, trying to stop the flood. 0 fucks given. So, that's pretty fucking amazing, really. I mean, it took, 40 hours to bring the flooding under control? Because she started to have an induced roll, didn't she?
And when you say induced roll, like, kind of explain that to some of our people. I mean, how big a list are we talking about here? Or is that just corkscrewing through the water?
So, what you had flooding in the Seacat magazine. There was flooding in the boiler room.
Mm-hmm.
And because you had a free surface, what happens is if you get a free surface, you get X amount of water in the hole. And then any roll through swell, say, is going to be exacerbated by this water sloshing backwards and forwards.
I understand.
So a free surface, one of the first things you want to do once you've established that you have a free surface problem is maybe put in what we used to call dwarf bulkheads. So you'll use lumber, anything you can get your hands on. And what you want to do is compartment that water, even if it's just behind 2 foot, 3 foot lumber. So as the ship rolls, you're not creating a bigger and bigger roll. One of the problems they had on Argonaut was we used to have these things called rover gas turbine pumps. Actually, as the lads got the rover out on the forecastle and were trying to start the rover, which is you have a big handle and you've got to wind this turbine up. She came under further attacks and 500-pounders landed port and starboard of the forecastle and absolutely drenched the team who were frantically winding this handle trying to get the rover kick-started. I mean, they had to do loads of stuff. They had to cut through holes in the mess, the PO's mess above, and then create a kind of route to get the unexploded bombs out. Now, interestingly enough, there was no SOP for this ever written. So that'll be interesting when we get to Antelope, because when we talk about Argonaut, the unexploded ordnance was lifted out the ship and then very gently dumped over the side.
I can add a little bit to this, Dom. In the period of the time, right? So nowadays you would expect that if something was happening, there'd be a discussion about what's your plan, what you're going to do, and everyone would talk it through and go, here we are. That is not what happened in those days, to the point where, so I was a final approach man on several big bombs, right? And basically they just went, you're the final approach man, off you go. There was no discussion about how are you going to do this. People would talk about or look at what the potential problems are. It was just, you went and did it. I mean, the first big thing I went to was a 2.5-ton culvert bomb that tragically blew up some RUC guys, and they went, okay, you're checking the firing point, which is notoriously for for some place that might be booby trapped, and just everyone disappeared and left me to it. There I was, 18 and a half, going through a firing point. No one said, yeah, what do you think the plan's going to be? Where do you think something might be? It was everyone disappeared and waited. So it is not a surprise to me that you were saying the things that you did. In those days, people hadn't really thought this through in terms of, let's make proper plans for what we're doing.
Yeah, and the proof in the pudding is Antrim and Argonaut, they ditched the bombs over the side. Antelope, as we'll see, they lost the ship, because the EOD guy there decided to use a rocket wrench and then a de-arming tool. And he had no SOP to follow, so he decided that was going to be his best course of action. Whereas whoever did Argonaut and Antrim decided, well, we're going to do it a different way. And the thing to remember with Argonaut is she's under air attack all the way through. They're getting a handle on the situation on board. They had a subsequent fire because whilst they were trying to remove the bomb, one of the chippies was using some welding gear, trying to cut a hole, which was going to be the egress route. They were going to lift the bomb out. And as he dived for cover, he dropped his welding kit into a pool of diesel fuel. And then the diesel caught light, so they had to, cope with that as well. It's a lot of people talk about Arden and Antelope, but I think, Tim, you'll agree with me that Argonaut and Antrim here, it was a phenomenal damage control effort by them.
It took days. Argonaut, these bombs went on the 21st. They got the bomb out in the Seacat magazine on the 25th. It took 4 days. And they were having some discussions about what the plan was going to be after the diving officer made another dive with a clearance diving officer when Antelope exploded. So they're having this discussion about how they're going to get this bomb out, and the ship next door with an unexploded bomb in it blows up. And in fact, Argonaut sent her whalers away to pick up Antelope's survivors. So she's still contributing to the operation, even though she's got these bombs in her.
Yeah, I did her skip a message, didn't he? Signalled, I can float and fight.
Action stations. Assume NVCD state 1 Zulu. Action stations.
So we better get on to Antrim, which was another an absolute epic story of damage control.
Yeah, so most of this comes from Chris Parry's book Down South, which is a really good read, which was basically his diary he wrote at the time. So shortly after Argonaut was attacked, Antrim came under attack from daggers. There was a lot of confusion during this raid. The flight deck team tried to report to the bridge the raid on Argonaut, the first raid by the Emachi, but they couldn't get a response from the bridge. Then there were reports of an air raid closing, and for some reason someone fired the chaff rockets. They fired a Seacat with the ship in a hard turn to starboard that missed, and they were straddled by bombs from a dagger which shook the ship. 30mm cannon shells hit the ship on the port side aft below the hangar and flight deck, and there was a fire on 2-deck portside passageway. About 10 minutes later, another raid was reported closing, being intercepted by Harriers. 2 sea slugs were fired unaimed to try and distract the attacking jets. And the whole of the back end of the ship, the quarterdeck, was covered in orange and white missile efflux. And just as they fired them, the number 1 laundry when it emerged onto the quarterdeck. And the result of that, all his clothes were torn to shreds. And he announced this got to be worth fucking British Empire medal. Then the number 2 laundryman followed out behind him and said, "Silly flucker, forgot his anti-flash."
Sorry, that's funny.
Yeah. So she came under more attack from cannons and bombs. And some of the aircraft on the flight deck and maintainers took shelter in and around the hangar, including the aviation fuel pump space where the pilot went, was Lieutenant Commander Ian Stanley. They were now taking some casualties. One of the crew, the aircrewman, P.O. Fitzgerald, I think it was, he had shrapnel wounds to his legs. His immersion suit was torn apart, and he had some concerns for his manhood, which he reported back to the ship as functioning correctly when he got home.
That's called an after-action report.
Yeah. Chief Petty Officer Bullingham, who was one of the flight maintainers, he took really severe facial injuries and he lost sight in both his eyes. The casualties, they took them off to Canberra. They also had casualties on the gun direction platform, where some of the ROs, the radio operators, and the Marines detachment colour sergeant major, they were quite seriously injured. So the damage to the ship, they had smoke pouring out of the port aft end of the flight deck. There was a fire main breach near the after heads, and flood and splinter holes on 2-deck port passageway. They had some navigation radar damage and damage to the 992 radar were out of action, but they got those back quite quickly, actually. The Wessex helicopter was on deck. Humphrey, he was known as, and was riddled with shrapnel, leaked fuel all over the flight deck. But a team of stokers came up and put a foam blanket down to prevent any fire. So, £1,000 bomb had gone through the port side sea slug flash door, into the Junior 8's toilets under the flight deck, and smashed all the porcelain. And there was a report to Damage Control HQ, Don, wasn't there? There's a £1,000 bomb in the aft shithouse, sir.
Yeah, number 3 trap.
Yeah.
Number 3 cubicle. It came to rest in.
Yeah. They got the radars back on quite quickly, and the worst casualties were taken to Canberra. In the next attack, apparently the port Seacat system locked onto an aircraft trying to attack Argonaut, but didn't fire as the operator didn't make the safe fire switch to fire. They got a Seacat away against an A4 that had attacked Brilliant, but it missed. So by that point, they'd fired 4 Seacats for no hits. They've later fired a 5th Seacat, apparently at an aircraft that might have attacked Ardent, but that again missed. Process of removing the bomb disposal team came over from St Tristram in a Wessex. Chief Petty Officer Diver Mick Fellows, so he would have been a clearance diver. The bomb was actually made in Derby, in the UK, and they would like to thank the manufacturers in Derby for some shoddy workmanship, perhaps. The chief shipwright, he cleared the debris, and he wedged the bomb in place with mattresses.
Initially, 2 sailors did it. Yeah, their 2 lads had to lie with their backs against it with their feet braced on the bulkhead because, again, she was rolling a little bit. So, yeah, 2 lads with decks, right? Brace that. Thanks. That's when you know your divisional officer hates you.
So they cut a hole in the flight deck, erected a set of sheer legs, block and tackle job. The team that were doing the cutting through the decks with oxyacetylene torches had to wear BA because there was that much smoke and fumes. They got a signal from the UK instructing that the bomb should be kept horizontal, which wasn't possible, so they ignored that, and they decided not to remove it until the air raids had stopped after dark. Once they got it up to the flight deck, they put it on a torpedo trolley, actually, wheeled it over to the side of the flight deck and chucked it over the side using a davit. Then 10 minutes later, they got a signal from Sink Fleet stating that under no circumstances was any attempt made to move unexploded bombs. Later that night, she withdrew from the AOE for repairs.
Because they signalled Mott, didn't they, to ask for advice about disarming the weapon because the fuse was all mangled on entry. And Mott signalled back and said, "We've got no advice," and then added, "Good luck."
The irony.
Yeah, because they're on £1,000 they're on 28-minute fuses delay. That was the assumption. So even though it bounced through the flash door, I think it also severed the steam pipe as well. That's what the excessive smoke through the ventilators. They were worried that there was a fire in the sea slug magazine, but actually it was just escaping steam, and it caused a large bulge in the flight deck as well, which was a point of concern. But that was probably just because it kind of bounced around, didn't it? It went through the flash door, bounced up, ricocheted off the flight deck, and then through a pyro locker, and then into number 3 trap in the Junior 8's heads. Hopefully not damaging the porn mags that would have been rolled up in the overhead.
I had to save the ship with those.
Yeah,
extra armor.
That would have been a disaster.
Tim, I'd like to cover the diving officer, basically. Right, so there's a couple of things that people probably won't recognise. The water in those areas is astonishingly cold. 1982, things were different. These were the days before. We still had dry suits, but they weren't the sort of typical dry suit you might get now. They were just membranes, and you would wear what was called a woolly bear. Basically, it was a very large fleece in the way of pajamas. Really, it's a one-piece suit, and you would wear it underneath it. You would have a neck seal, which would go over your head. There was in 1982. I'm pretty certain they didn't have a zip entry. It was still at the point where you would have a neck entry. So you'd have to go through and there would be a little steel piece around your neck and hold on a cuff around your neck, which would keep the seal, right? Now, I remember this is not, 1982. So I did my training 1983, just a little bit after the Falklands. I remember I passed out as a result of the cold that was down in Southampton, of all places, right? Because I was diving, because I didn't have my woolly bear on. All I had was my standard lightweights, British Army stuff, and my jumper on, and I passed out as a result of the cold. The cold for the person doing that dive would have been extraordinary. I don't know what it would be, 3 degrees or something along those lines. And importantly, right, so you've got these 2 cylinders on your back, right? Maybe, possibly, he had what would be known as surface demand, which would be a very long cable. I don't think, it doesn't sound like he did have that, right? That dive would have been extraordinarily brave. He wouldn't know whether it was coming out of it, right? You were trying to find in immense cold. You were trying to find exactly what's happening. You were using your hands. Oh, and by the way, these are the days before neoprene mitts, etc., etc. Probably not, you didn't have lights on your helmet or anything. You were doing everything by feel. It's quite, listening to that, it's quite astonishing. Having understood, gone through exactly the same thing that they did, the naval diving, very, very similar to the army diving. Gosh, amazing stuff.
Yeah, you got the DSC for that, and jolly well deserved it.
I am not surprised, because it's astonishing stuff, right?
Can I just sort of put a cap on the Antrim, the actual pilots and how they got there and how they got out?
Please do.
So I was researching them, and there's a couple different tracks that the Dagger guys used, and then and there's a couple tracks that they shared with the Skyhawk guys. These guys, the ones that attacked the Antrim that came in, they came in sort of down Byron Sound, and they would. It looks like to me they would go up the valley just to the north of Mount and come down around Mount Rosalie, and or Mount Maria in this case. No, they were up by, and they're using the terrain the whole time. These are wide valleys, but the terrain on either the high terrain is 2,100 feet, 700 meters. There's no way anybody can see them. From what I understand of the the radar pickets, they're just not picking them up until they're practically in the sound. And on this particular attack, with the 2 waves that hit Antrim, they both made it home, and from what I can tell, to fight again. I don't think there were any shoot downs on that group, were there?
I've not seen any. I haven't got. I had a chart of morning, afternoon kills.
Yeah,
but I haven't got it. But no, I think they made it out. I think the thing is with Argonaut, they achieved a mission kill, which as we know, that's as good as a sinking. If you do a mission kill, if you kill a ship's ability to do her job, doesn't matter if she's still afloat. She's just a chunk of metal. Antrim, I suppose you could argue, killed her Sea Slug launcher system. Was Sea Slug really any good? No. Did it affect her Seacat launchers? I think I'm right in saying both her port and starboard Seacat launchers were back up, and her 4.5 gun and her MRS-3 system remained operational throughout. So not a mission kill, just pure luck, and probably a few feet either way. If her Sea Slug magazine had gone up with a few tons of high explosive, plus the associated boosters, not only would it have killed her, but whoever was kind of within quarter of a mile at the time would probably have suffered some structural damage as well. So it would have been possibly their biggest success of the war. And of course, they'd have lost the anti-air warfare coordinator for the amphibious group, and another ship would have had to have taken that over. How seamlessly they could do that back then, I don't know.
It would have been complicated. So of the 8 daggers that came in and attacked in that 6-minute period, 7 of them made it home, which is a success rate that the Argentinians didn't experience really after that. It had to sort of buoy their morale a little bit that they were able to inflict damage and yet bring almost everybody home. It's about a 12% attrition rate, and they were operating right at the edge of their operational capabilities. I mean, they, especially the daggers, they can make one pass through the Sound, and then they, for fuel reasons, have to go home.
So I've got a question. Is it a prop plane or is it a jet plane?
The dagger is the it's the sort of the Argentinian / Israeli version of the Mirage 5. So it's a hot potato, man. It's a swept wing Mach close to 1.8, I think. Super fast.
Oh, pretty fast then.
Oh yeah, very fast. Very thirsty. They carry tanks. As a matter of fact, one of those low-level shots of a dagger, you can see they're actually flying combat with transit tanks on a lot of their which are tanks that were not meant to be subjected to heavy maneuvering, but that they did what that's what they had. It's pretty amazing, really, but they just definitely caught everybody at just the perfect time. But that was their last, to me, most, and as Gunny alluded to, sort of their most successful mission surge. But it was a very busy place over the Sound there for those 8 minutes. I mean, they had 8 separate attacks in a 5-mile radius on 3 different ships. That's a lot.
And to look at it from the gunnery point of view, and as regular listeners will know, I fucking love gunnery. If you look at some of the photos, there's an amazing photo of a dagger doing a low level pass. Now just imagine you're on the end of a 20mm cannon, right? It's a fairly heavy bit of kit. You're strapped into it. You've got the shoulder sort of harness up against you. You're shooting at something which is passing parallel to the ship, but you're in an anchorage. So there's a very real danger as you're holding the trigger down. You might not be in controlled bursts of 3 to 5 to 8 rounds. You might have a great sight picture, right? And he's 1/4 mile away and he's flying parallel down to the ship and he's in the turn to starboard. So you've got a good cross section of him. And then HMS Fearless passes into your point of view. And that's going to be a split second. You've got to get your finger off the trigger because otherwise you're going to put 15, 20 rounds of 20mm into another ship. And it's not like the old days where in World War II you would see these big steel frames around mounts to prevent you firing into parts of the ship that you didn't want to. There was none of that there. These 20mm were purely there for gunboat diplomacy. They were there to stop Indonesian fishing vessels that wouldn't stop if you're on the Beira patrol, or put a couple of rounds in front of an Icelandic Coast Guard vessel. And these boys, now they're rock and roll 20mm, and they're firing at very fast moving tracks, left to right, right to left, sometimes overhead, doing fast mag changes. Frankly, I'm astonished there wasn't more blue on blue and more rounds being put into the wrong target. Because certainly happened in 1991 when was it Samuel B. Roberts? She put some rounds into one of the US battleships. It's fairly easily done. That was a chaff cloud misidentified. I'm glad we were on the other side of her because I sound watched that. Now multiply that by 100. Imagine all those GPMGs firing, all those light machine guns, 40-60 Bofors, stuff like that. So I think whilst I think the standard of gunnery for the Royal Navy wasn't fantastic, I think it speaks a lot for the training of the aimers that more ships didn't have rounds pumped into them by other ships firing. And certainly one of the big problems that came out from this was the utter lack of coordination between embarked troops and the Royal Navy. So you put people ashore, don't you, David? And you what do you say to the task group commander? You say, right, I've got X amount of LMGs, I've got X amount of GPMGs. How can I employ them to help you with the air defense problem? What happened was everyone dug a shell scrape, and then it was just a fucking free for all. You had dozens and dozens of GPMGs, LMGs, SLRs. Everyone is going rock and roll on fast moving air contacts over the heads of warships who were themselves, if I'm firing a 40-60 Beaufort and I'm tracking that contact going left to right, and in the background there's a hill, well, it might be just a bit of Falkland Islands territory, or two para reg might be dug in. So, yeah, really, really difficult. And the utter total lack of coordination between troops ashore and COMAW's ships. I think that speaks to the back of a fag packet style of operation this was. And then you see that with Rapier as well, which, Rapier was an absolute disaster.
Did it?
Yeah, through problems with the system, but also the way it was stored. The fact that blind fire radar wasn't fitted, the IFF problems, and the fact that it needed 24 hours bedding in, all of that kind of thing. So, the air defence was very much a suck it and see. Tim, do you want to do Brilliant?
So Brilliant was positioned in Falkland Sound to try and break up raids before they reached San Carlos itself. When the Antrim was damaged, Brilliant's XO took over directing the Sea Harriers. Lieutenant Commander Leon Holm was an ex-fighter controller and had been an instructor at the School of Fire Control. He'd actually already given Sharkey Ward's section the heads up for his Pucara kill earlier in the morning of the 21st of May. Brilliant was attacked by a Group 06 Dagger, strafing her with 30mm cannon fire. Sharkey Ward was back on cap on another salty calling Hume for trade. There's a raid coming in, wait out, he replied, and Ward and his wingman Neil Thomas could actually hear the sound of 30mm cannon shells hitting Brilliant in the background. Shrapnel burst through the ops room and Leon Holm was hit in the left shoulder. The petty officer next to him was concussed by a large piece of shrapnel and suffered a suspected fractured skull. Another man was hit in his legs and another had a slash across his nose. Up on the bridge wing, another sailor was injured. It's believed over 20 rounds hit the ship in total. And you could actually see out of the starboard side of the ops room. Cable runs to the forward Seawolf launcher from the Seawolf computer room were severed, and power was lost to the Exocet launchers forward. Chief Petty Officer John Bohr was the engineer officer watch in the machinery control room. He recalled that 4 red lights illuminated to show chilled water supply had been lost. As he was the system maintainer, the marine engineer officer sent him forward to investigate and took over as engineer officer of the watch. There were multiple splits in the chilled water pipework, which meant loss of all weapons and sonar bar the Beaufort guns. Captain Coward made a ShipWrekt pipe ending with anyone who wants to shoot back at the Argies, draw a weapon from the small arms store. Fortunately, the Type 967 radar was still working, and so Hume could continue to direct the air battle, working through the rest of the day and night. Chief Bohr and his team were able to plug the holes in the chill water pipes, making plugs where needed in the workshops. Captain Coward concealed the damage initially from the Admiral so that they could keep directing the air battle, but Sink Fleet ordered her out eventually for repair from Stena Sea Spread. Other parts of the ship damaged were the officers' toilets and the wardroom wine store.
So HMS Ardent, Type 21 frigate, we have to remember is Type 21 frigates were very much a bargain basement type warship in many ways. So steel hull, aluminium superstructure. You will hear a lot of things said about aluminium on warships. the fact that it can burn at certain temperatures and that it will melt. The thing to remember is if you're on board a warship and temperatures are about 800 degrees and the aluminium starts melting, you're in fucking trouble, right? Anyway, so yes, steel is, of course, a better material to build warships from, but the use of aluminium in the Type 21s, and no, Type 42s were not built of aluminium. That's a constant thing that you'll read about. That is not true. Absolutely promise you. Type 21's kind of a bargain, multi-purpose, general purpose frigate. Carried a 4.5 Mark 8-inch gun, which was the Royal Navy's latest medium gun. Carried Seacat. As we know, Seacat wasn't a particularly effective system, but it did have a different fire control system. It was Italian. It actually was a very, very good fire control radar compared to what we were using prior. Its detection ranges were actually fairly good. She had fire control radars fore and aft. They had a CCTV system bolted on, and its advantages, the GTX system, was that it made switching between main gun and Seacat missile system fairly sort of seamless if the system worked properly. So you've got HMS Ardent. HMS Ardent she was a bit of a superstar within the frigate squadron. Considered to be the squadron top dog, especially in missile and gunnery, and her flight department was supposed to be excellent. Ship's company, the vast majority of them had been on board a long time, so they were well established. The importance of that cannot be overstated, right? If you've got a high turnover as ship's company, then you're in a continuous training program. Once you get a ship's company who are long on board, right? They're comfortable with the ship, they understand the ship. That goes an awful long way to operational effectiveness, as it does in any military unit. She was assessed as being in good material state, by which we mean there was a minimum number of what you call op deaths, operational defects. There were some issues that had been flagged before the war. There was a lack of opportunity to practice emergency mode firing. What we mean by that is short notice engagement. So rather than detect the aircraft at 50 miles, start shooting at it with a gun at 10 miles, start your Seacat engagement at 3 miles or whatever. Close-in engagement. So what we would call an alarm procedure, getting the gun via the director onto target at 1 mile, close range coordination, so the 20 mil, and most importantly for Arden, doing an emergency engagement with Seacat missile. She had 2 20 mils on board, but despite a desperate request, she only managed to get 1 general purpose machine gun added and a couple of light machine guns. Initially employed doing naval gunfire support, so attacking targets ashore. She had a really successful shoot on the 20th. She managed to damage 3 Picaras on a landing strip. On the 21st, good day, excellent visibility. Pairs of aircraft, Picara and the odd Mirage, had engaged her without success initially. At 1600 hours on the 21st, a single A4 dropped 2 bombs. Probably 500-pounders, I think. I don't think they were 1,000-pounders. They both failed to detonate. They were hit the water either side. No serious damage. The ops room learned that switching what we call GSA-4, so that fire control system, RTN 10X, from naval gunfire to AA, needed adopting. It was a steep learning curve, but the ops room were, at this stage, they were all over it. They were, it was a fast few hours of learning mode. She'd fired 3 Seacats, and one of her biggest problems was her 992 air search radar. The stabilizer was damaged, but luckily the radar continued operating. So the stabilizer, if you look at the aerial, a radar aerial, obviously ships roll. And what you don't want is the radar rolling with the ship, right? Because it sends out a beam, and that's going to fuck about with how the beam performs. So we usually have a stabilizer on a radar aerial. If it goes wrong, it's a bit of a nightmare. I've been on a ship, and I was radar department, and our 996 aerial, the stabilizer went, and the aerial was hard over. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. and I got shaken and I got told, you're going up the mainmast. Fantastic. 1700 hours, Ardent proceeded west to Northwest Island with Yarmouth, the Crazy Wide. And at 1740 hours, 3A4 circled Ardent anti-clockwise at about 2 miles, then attacked off a port quarter. So that's out of the what you call 4-5 arc. So the guns mounted forward. So this was a well thought out attack by these guys. I'm sure Hobbs got some stuff on this. So main gun couldn't shoot. Ops room attempted a Seacat engagement, but failed because the launcher couldn't be put in PED control from the hangar roof. Now, I've not seen enough photos. I have looked. I can't see where the manual, what we would call local aiming site is or was on the Type 21 frigate. But from the sound of it, there was a pedestal control position where a Seacat aimer could basically take the Seacat off a radar and then fire it via binocular sight. And the accounts I've seen suggest that a switch was not made between the ops room and PED. So the guy on the pedestal controller was, frantically pulling the trigger, and the switch wasn't made in the ops room. That's the best that I can make out from the Board of Inquiry. The Skyhawks made a run-in. He was struck by cannon fire and bombs. 2, I think, 500-pounders went into the hangar and destroyed it completely. The Seacat launcher was blown onto the flight deck. The Lynx that was parked on the flight deck was absolutely trashed. 1 bomb probably passed through aft, switchboard room, and into the after auxiliary machinery space without exploding. Total loss of fire main. Fire main is essential. Fire main is the big red pipe that runs around the ship on every single deck. And that's where you clag in your hoses at different hydrant positions. What you will do is you will isolate the fire main in action so that if you lose one compartment, you can reroute the fire main through to another compartment and you will keep pressure on. Unfortunately, in this case...
Fire main, you're talking about, that's water in there and not oxygen, right?
Yeah, that's just your water. And it's a massive, thick... it might be sort of 35 centimeters thick main, and that runs, round every single deck. They reported considerable flooding in the junior H dining hall, so that would say the fire main was breached and it was pumping uncontrollably. Junior H galley, severe flooding, and most importantly at this point, the ship control center. I think I'm right in saying on Type 21s, the ship control center where you control the engines, and HQ1, which is your damage control center, were co-located. So quickly they had to evacuate the SCC and HQ1. Loss of power to 4-5 gun. So loss of Seacat. Seacat's been blown onto the flight deck. The 4-5 gun, no hydraulics. So somewhere there had been a hydraulics and electrical failure. Lots of casualties. And because the ship whipped violently, because there were 2 near misses as well, you probably had a considerable amount of shock damage through the ship, because as we discussed with HMS Sheffield, what happens is when a ship's impacted by a very high velocity projectile and then that explodes, the ship will whip violently around its axis. The degree to which will decide how much damage that you have, but that can rip piping joints out, it can fracture diesel, your fire main. You can be thrown about the compartment initially. You'll lose electrical lighting. So you'll go to emergency lighting through the ship, which is okay, but it's not fantastic. Equipment that's mounted on resilient mounts, that'll be shaken around. That will probably fail to one degree or another. And obviously your machinery might trip. So your diesel generators might trip. And it sounds like the whipping was so bad, there was probably flooding through the sonar dome as well. So the sonar space on a warship is a natural structural weakness, because obviously you've got the transducer which sits through the hull. So you've got a hole in the hull bottom. You've got a fiberglass dome over that. I mean, you've got a sealant. Now imagine a ship whipping. That's going to destroy the watertight integrity. It's going to be an awful lot of water coming up through there. Right, now, this is in a split second. right? So the ship's company have gone from being a fighting unit, and then suddenly the ship is just in absolute clip, and you're going to have those normal few seconds where everyone's kind of getting up, shaking their head. What the hell? The lights are off. If you're close to the scene of flooding, you're going to hear the water coming through. You might hear the shouts of someone shouting, "Fire, fire, fire, fire in the after auxiliary machinery space." The main broadcast might go off, "Carry out blanket search, report any damage to HQ1." And that's where the training of the ship's company really kick in. That happened at 1740. 20 minutes later, 1800, she's further attacked by a number of A4s. At least 2, accounts would suggest probably 4 bombs detonated in the hangar, on the flight deck, and into the quarterdeck. Now, the tragedy of this is, in those intervening 20 minutes, the aft fire repair party team, they'd gone up, shaken themselves off, and they'd started doing damage control, and the fire in the hangar was pretty much under control. They were attacking the flooding in the after auxiliary machinery space. Despite the fact that they'd lost HQ1, some kind of coordination between forward and aft damage control teams had been established. Because what happens is, if you lose HQ1, back in these days, there was no alternate, what we would call HQ2. There was HQ1, and then that was it. If you lost that, you would be reduced to runners, and maybe, David, we had wired telephones that we would run in extremis with the old crank the handle telephone call. So, the boys that were just getting on top of it, these bombs go in, pretty much everyone in the aft fire repair party team is killed immediately. Some of the bombs didn't explode. Some of them did. Some of them went through the ship one side and came out the other. The ship whipped again violently. A lot of the guys were thrown around in compartments. The flooding in the Junior 8's dining hall increased dramatically. She lost steering. And this is the extent to which she'd been hit. Numerous reports after action say that the hull was grinding and flexing for the few minutes after the second air attack had gone in. That says to me her back was broken. I personally think one of the bombs that didn't detonate went through the hull and probably through the keel, and there was a complete loss of hull integrity. So she was basically flexing around her back. By this stage, she was a loss. There was nothing they could really do. Some of the guys who came up onto the upper deck said they heard massive flooding through machinery spaces as well. But they just dropped the hatches and thought, well, I'd better get on the upper deck and wait out for it. And despite all of this, they still tried to control the fires aft. We'll stick a photo of her or two in the sources. She was Tim, she was devastated, wasn't she?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, she was an absolute wreck from a mainmast down aft.
I honestly can't believe she lasted as long as she did. And it's a real tribute to the crew. And I know it's a bargain basement ship in many senses, but I mean, if I'm doing the numbers right, it was attacked by no less than 9 aircraft in less than an hour. Some more effectively than the others, but nevertheless, I mean, this is a fighting ship. It's a miracle it made it to the 22nd. I don't know how they did that. Yeah, you probably do though.
Well, I mean, she was just a well-built warship. I think it's an absolute tribute to her builders that she took that. I mean, the rounds going off, the ordnance going off alongside is going to really wreck a thin-skinned warship. The fact that she took all of these from down aft, but they didn't give up on her. So, for a damage control party, they start working their way down aft. Reports start coming into the CO. She quickly takes on a list to starboard. That's pretty much in line with catastrophic flooding in the main machinery space. I can't think of anywhere else where that would happen. Again, I think her back was broken, and she had massive asymmetrical flooding. tiller flap was gone, so she had no steering. Both times she was running on 2-time gas turbines. They were both tripped on order of command. And then the XO goes to see the CO and he says, I think we've lost the ship. Time to go. Yarmouth, the Crazy Wise, signalled to come alongside to pick up survivors. And a CO, Alan West, is last to leave the ship about 18:55 Zulu that evening. She continued to burn and explode periodically throughout the night. Probably went about 06:30 the following morning, with 22 of the ship's company still on board. I, like Tim, I've read the Board of Inquiry. I think the Board of Inquiry is disingenuous at best. I think it's insulting in part, given some of the excuses that were used in other boards of inquiry. The amount of damage that she suffered, the list, her stern being effectively blown off, no fire main. In the BOI, if the fire aft had been contained, fucking really? Whoever put that into the Board of Inquiry clearly had never attended damage control school in the past sort of 20 years. If the back end is absolutely trashed and you've lost one of 2 fire and repair party posts, you have no fire main. I haven't seen anything to say if they managed to get a rover pump going. Certainly the Yarmouth did her best trying to get some hoses on the fire down aft. Another phrase that was thrown in, mental unpreparedness, clearly an important factor in the loss of the ship.
That just pisses me off.
And then on investigating, stories and mythology surrounded the loss of the ship as regards to the ship's company. Well, I don't know.
What does that mean?
Yeah, show me an escort that's suffered 6, 7, 8,000 pounders going off in and around the ship with a back broken, lost a fire main, lost a tannoy after a few minutes, uncontrolled spread of smoke. I don't know. I mean, for me, I would probably ask why the blokes were sent down on a general purpose frigate that didn't have smoke curtains, that had insufficient breathing apparatus, that didn't have sufficient rover fire pumps and Weeder fire pumps, that had CCAT system that was designed in 1948-49, and a bargain basement GTX 10 fire control system that, compared to what the US was fielding, which was probably SPG 51 at that stage, even at that early stage, was positively, archaic.
It's one of the best documented overall missions that I've been able to find from both ends.
Yeah, and there were lessons there. I mean, the blanket searches. So I say blanket searches. So what happens is, if the ship's attacked and let's say you hear thump, thump, and the ship shakes, over the main broadcast from HQ1, you'll hear stand to, carry out blanket search. And what happens is, in the forward and aft fire repair party posts, the boys and girls will go down every single compartment, and what they're doing is they're looking for signs of damage. So with Ardent, the blanket search after the initial attack was absolutely effective. However, there was a breakdown of communications between the after fire repair party posts and HQ1 and the bridge. So they lost comms, essentially. So there were no phones, because probably internal comms had gone. Back in those days, you didn't have radios. We would have little walkie-talkies. So, in extremis, you could run a field telephone, but it wasn't really very practical. But you might have radios. They were reduced to using a runner. By the BOI's own admittance, initial damage control and firefighting was effective. Despite the fire main being lost, it was quickly restored. Process for getting the power back to the 4.5 gun, electrical and hydraulic, was well established and was in process by the time of the second attack. The issues were no alternate HQ1. Once they lost HQ1, there was no alternate. Well, there's a lesson from World War I. The importance of close range weapon systems, particularly if the main gun was out of arcs. There's a lesson from World War I. Certainly from World War II. How important a smoke boundary is. Well, there's a lesson from World War I. Why are we relearning this yet again? Why does it take things like Sheffield and Ardent for the Royal Navy to go, oh, smoke is bad and it kills people. 1983, suddenly you get smoke curtains put up everywhere on every single warship, big, heavy, thick Velcro smoke curtains. And sustainable portable comms in case you lose your main broadcast. So all of these things, right? None of this is rocket science, and yet the BOI has the fucking audacity to say things like, "If the fire had been contained aft," when everything after the mainmast was an absolute wreck, and the after FRPP party had died just as they were getting a handle on it. It absolutely infuriates me. But there you go.
It won't be the first time that a board has thrown people under the bus, though, will it? Right? You've only got to look at the Chinook the Chinook guys, the RAF Chinook guys who flew into the side of a mountain, and the RAF threw them under the bus, etc. It's happened on many occasions.
Yeah, and the BOI was pretty scathing about Sheffield, and that was entirely justified. But the BOI did not go far enough in that it didn't recommend that Sam Salt was court-martialed alongside the AWO and alongside the whoever was the anti-air warfare coordinator on Invincible that day. I'd have court-martialed him myself, but we're in the midst of mutual backslapping, Royal Britannia flag waving, and people died unnecessarily.
Join us for the conclusion of the Battle of San Carlos in Part 4 this Thursday.